So today, we're going to talk about a time that really changed everything, the Enlightenment. This was an incredibly bold, almost crazy idea to tear down everything people thought they knew and rebuild the world from scratch, all using one powerful tool: human reason.
You see, the thinkers of this era, the philosophers, the writers, the scientists, they saw themselves as total pioneers. They weren't just having a few new ideas. They genuinely believed they were starting a brand new age of progress for all of humanity. Their whole mission was to free people from what they saw as the chains of superstition, intolerance, and the unchecked power of kings and churches.
And this, right here, is the big question that drove the entire thing. I mean, what does happen when you decide that tradition and authority just aren't good enough anymore? When you decide to question absolutely everything and build a new foundation for knowledge, for society, for who you are? It's a thrilling idea, but it's also a pretty dangerous one.
To really get how radical this was, we've got to take a step back and look at the world before all this. For centuries, the big questions in life, the answers were already decided for you. Truth wasn't something you went out and found, it was something you were given.
Yeah. In the medieval world, truth came from the top down. It came from the church, from the king, from ancient books. I mean, reason existed, sure, but it had to play inside a very small sandbox, a sandbox defined by faith. Your job wasn't to ask why, it was just to understand the answers you were already given.
So the Enlightenment's big move was to just flip that entire model on its head. The whole idea was that any individual, you, me, anyone, could figure out the world for themselves, as long as they had the right tools. And that, of course, meant they needed a whole new toolkit for thinking.
And right away, two main paths kind of opened up. On one side, you had the rationalists. They believed that truth comes from the inside out. That pure, logical reason, starting right inside your own head, was the key to everything. On the other side, you had the empiricists. They said, nope, it's the other way around. All knowledge has to come from the outside in, through your senses and your experiences.
So the most famous rationalist, René Descartes, he took this inside-out idea to the absolute limit. He decided he was going to doubt everything. His senses could be fooling him. His memories, maybe they're fake. He wanted to find just one thing, one single thing he could be absolutely certain of. And he found it. The one thing he couldn't doubt was that he was doubting. The very act of thinking proved his own existence. I think, therefore I am. Boom. That was his solid ground.
Then you've got John Locke, a major empiricist, coming at it from the total opposite direction. He argued that we're born with, well, nothing. No innate ideas. Our mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate. Now just stop and think about how radical that is. If everyone starts as a blank slate, it means nobody is born better or worse than anyone else. Your place in society isn't decided by God. That one idea was a huge threat to the entire class system of Europe. And this new focus on experience got a massive power-up from Francis Bacon and his scientific method. See, before, science usually worked deductively. You'd start with a big principle from, say, Aristotle or the Bible, and then try to make the world fit. Bacon said, no, let's flip it. Let's start with that blank slate, go out and carefully observe nature, and build our knowledge from the ground up. That's the inductive method, and it's basically the engine of all modern science.
But Bacon was smart. He knew that our minds aren't perfect cameras. He pointed out these 4 idols, which you can just think of as bugs in our mental software that mess with our thinking. You've got idols of the tribe. Those are the flaws we all have as humans, like seeing patterns that aren't there. Then idols of the cave, which are your own personal biases from your background. Idols of the marketplace, or all the ways language trips us up. And finally, idols of the theater, which is just blindly following old philosophies without question. The big takeaway here is if you want to see the world clearly, you have to know about your own blind spots first.
Okay, so once you have this incredible new toolkit for understanding nature, it was really only a matter of time before thinkers started pointing it at the human world, at government, at politics, at society itself.
And if you're going to redesign society, you have to start with a really fundamental question. If you could strip away all the layers of civilization, all the laws, the rules, the religion, what is a human being at their absolute core? This little thought experiment was called the state of nature.
And oh boy, did they get different answers. On one hand, you have Thomas Hobbes. He thought the state of nature would be a complete nightmare, a chaotic war of all against all. He famously said life without a powerful kin to keep everyone in line would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. But then John Locke had a much more optimistic take. He believed that even without government, people are guided by reason and have natural rights.
And listen, this wasn't just idle chatter.
These were actual blueprints for a totally new kind of society, the idea of a social contract, where power comes from the people, not from God. Montesquieu's genius idea of separating powers so no one person could become a tyrant, Voltaire's passionate defense of free speech, and Locke's ultimate safety valve, the people's right to revolution. I mean, this is the basic code for modern democracy, and they were writing it in an age of kings.
But not everyone was on board with this new empire of reason. Even while the Enlightenment was picking up speed, some thinkers, even some of its own, started to point out some pretty serious cracks in the whole foundation. So, the philosopher David Hume, he took Locke's empiricism and pushed it to its most terrifying conclusion. He said, okay, if all we ever know are the sensations coming into our brains, how can we ever be sure there's a real world out there causing them? He argued we only ever know our ideas of the world, not the world itself. He even questioned something as basic as cause and effect. This was a huge blow to the certainty that the Enlightenment was trying so hard to build.
And the critiques just kept piling on. People started asking, hey, is this so-called universal reason really universal, or is it just, a white European male way of thinking? Post-colonial thinkers pointed out how the idea of reason was often used to justify colonialism. Later, psychoanalysis would come along and say that reason is just the tiny tip of the iceberg floating on a huge ocean of unconscious feelings and desires. And even a guy from the Enlightenment itself, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, argued that reason had actually corrupted us and that our emotions and instincts were a much better guide.
So, despite all those really powerful critiques, the fact is, we're living in a world that was profoundly shaped by the Enlightenment. Its ideas are so deep in our society that most of the time we don't even see them. They're like the air we breathe.
I mean, seriously, think about it. The scientific method that gives us modern medicine and technology, that's from the Enlightenment. The very idea that there are universal human rights, Enlightenment. The structure of our democracies, with constitutions and checks and balances, pure Enlightenment. Even that basic belief that things can get better, that we can make progress as a society, that's a core Enlightenment idea. And maybe the biggest one of all, that little voice in your head that tells you to trust your own judgment instead of just blindly following authority, that's the spirit of the Enlightenment right there.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really important question. The Enlightenment gave us this incredible toolkit for thinking rationally, for doing science, for building fairer societies, but its critics had a point. It didn't have as much to say about emotion or community or all the messy, non-rational parts of being human. So the question for us today is this: is that original toolkit, as brilliant as it was, still enough to get us through the complex problems of the 21st century?